Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com or at revolution.radio now. Anyway, we are speaking with Isabella Price today about goddess power, and we'll be joining her in just a few moments. For those of you that are listening to us on revolution.radio, we thank you for joining us. We aren't streaming live today on Facebook Live. There seems to be an extension problem. You know, updates. You gotta love updates. Anyway, what else is new? Anyway, so without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about my guest today. Isabella Price is an international speaker. She's adjunct faculty at JFK University and the author of the One Truth, Many Paths book series on the world's wisdom traditions, which includes her most recent best-selling book, Goddess Power, Awakening the Wisdom of the Divine Feminine in Your Life. For over 25 years, Isabella has been teaching classes and workshops at numerous institutions of higher education and religious venues. She holds an MA in the Humanities from the University of Zurich, Switzerland. She is certified SQ21 Spiritual Intelligence Coach, and also teaches meditation to veterans suffering from PTSD and other community members. For more information, of course, please go visit her website, onetruth/manypaths.com. So without further ado, let me welcome our new friend to the show, Isabella Price. Thank you for joining us today, Isabella. How are you?
I'm fine, and thank you so much for having me on your show, Bernard. I'm delighted to be here with you and everybody listening in, and can't wait to dive right into the essence of the goddess wisdom with you.
Sounds perfect. Sounds great, and exactly right up my alley, as they say. You know, it was interesting when we scheduled this show. I didn't realize it was going to be the same week as the Women's March. So there's all this like feminine energy in the air, you know, so we're going to keep riding that goddess energy flow here on today's show. Riding the wave of the divine feminine.
Very auspicious indeed.
Absolutely. So let's start, Isabella. I always like to start the show when we're meeting somebody new. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey into discovering the goddess and focusing and studying and teaching all about the divine feminine wisdom?
Yes, it's been quite a long journey. I would say it started when I was a girl, you know, growing up in Switzerland. I had an Italian mother, so I spent a lot of time in Italy playing with my cousins there. And whenever I would go and visit churches, which you're supposed to do as a well-behaved little Catholic girl, I was drawn to the icon of the Virgin Mary. And it was more like an energetic pool that drew me in, and I kept looking up at her, and you know, she had that crown of golden stars, and there was like, she exuded an energetic presence that calmed me, and I felt held in the embrace of the mother, and she looked really sublime, you know. I would really look up at her, somehow admire her. So there was a connection, a deeper soul connection. And I think that stayed with me all my life, but I lost it a little bit. And, growing up in Switzerland, you have to know it's a very secular culture. If you mention the word spiritual there, or you would have mentioned it, people would have looked at you as a total weirdo. It just didn't even exist in their vocabulary, let alone in the collective consciousness, at least when I grew up there, in the 70s and 80s. And then what really, the shift really happened after I moved to the United States 16 years ago, which was very serendipitous. I had to just leave and just, start like a blank slate or a blank canvas. And, I met, of course, my partner then, who's, Californian, and just decided to take the leap over the pond. And then something interesting happened. Somehow our synergies together catapulted us on a spiritual path that led us to India, to many places, and also to a holy mother. You probably know her. She's known as the hugging saint Amachi, Srimati Amritananda Mai Devi. She's hugged like 35 plus million people worldwide. And she just happens to come twice a year to the San Francisco Bay Area, where I've now been living. And she has her ashram literally half an hour from our home. And so, after we traveled to India in 2004, we did not yet know about her, but we had all these really deep transformative experiences. I was on a spiritual high. The whole time in India, it was like almost being intoxicated with spirit. I know you can relate to that experience. And somehow we heard about her after we came back. We went to a little Tibetan festival here in Berkeley, which is an awesome community, and it told us about Amma. And then we thought, well, let's go and see her. And the first time when I was there, I saw her, hugging this countless stream of people approaching her, and I thought, well, she's kind of cute, she's that loving person, but I didn't get her yet. I had to go back a few more times when I certainly started to have, the light bulb going off, these aha moments, and I really felt, wow, she's cooking me, she's really working me, and it's like that stage play that's unfolding, and people say things to me, people that I don't even know. How can they know that about me? And of course there was some ego resistance there, and I really had the most incredible experiences, and sometimes I would just erupt into cosmic laughter because, I had to heal myself, as we all do, from a lot of stuff going back to my childhood, past life stuff that we've had, where we've been persecuted and whatnot. So that cosmic laughter that I was able to experience at her ashram had a deeply healing effect on me on a soul level. And I came to realize that there is no difference between the Black Madonna and Amma, who has a very dark skin and is from southern India. And I realized in essence they are the same. They just have a different physical appearance because we're talking about different cultures. But the mother, the divine mother, whatever you want to call her, has this enduring essence which is always the same, even though she appears in multiple names, manifestations, symbols, and mythic narratives across cultures and religions. So again, I can only say that Amma, the countless spiritual transmissions that I have been very fortunate to receive from her, have had a deeply healing effect on me, and there was never any coercion, because I would have been out of there had there been any coercion. I'm an autonomous, freedom-loving person, so I just want to say it was just always love, given freely. Hugs don't cost anything, free love. And I could share one more story about Amma and the Black Madonna if we have time, perhaps just 1-2 minutes, if you're willing to go along the ride with me. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. Go right ahead, Isabella. I'd love to hear it.
Awesome. Yeah, I was there. Amma also has healers who work for her. So that was about 8 years ago. I signed up for an acupuncture session. And, it was kind of in a trailer at the ashram, and then somebody knocked on the door, and the acupuncturist was still busy with another patient. And so I opened the door, and it was this beautiful African American woman who came in and asked if she could talk to the acupuncturist. And so I would let her know, and then she came in, this beautiful woman, and sat right next to my mattress, where I eventually then lied down. And then the doctor came, she put needles in my body, and you're helpless, you can't move when you have needles in. And then something truly miraculous happened. This beautiful African American woman started to intone a humming sound, and eventually this humming sound grew into a crescendo, and she started to sing the Ave Maria in Latin, which, was the language I had heard in some of the Italian churches. And she sang the whole Ave Maria while I had my session there. And it evoked these childhood memories. And I remember I had this deep release and healing. I had tears coming down. I was so blown away because it came so unexpected. And what's even more interesting is that the day before, when I had gone up for a hug with Amma, I gave her a picture of the Black Madonna of Switzerland, which is in a place called Einsiedeln. And I had wrote on the back that I cannot make a difference between you and the Black Madonna. You are the same in essence. And Amma received that into her hands. And so that session with the acupuncturist was the following day, which of course was no coincidence. And I had that deep, profound healing. And as it turned out, this beautiful lady was an aspiring opera star. She had a voice that was gorgeous. Now, where can you get an acupuncture session with an aspiring opera star chanting next to you? And that happened only once, of course, as it always does, but it was incredibly profound and led to a deep healing on the soul level, which I needed at that particular moment.
Wow.
Just one example.
One fantastic example. You're very lucky to have experienced that. What a great story, and what a great experience you had. Wonderful. Yeah. So, let's talk about the goddess a little bit. We've already covered a little bit about your path, and of course, the Black Madonna. And right now, for me, in this time of humanity's history, being that we have been patriarchal for thousands of years, and the goddess and the divine feminine has been suppressed for so long, we are starting to see a little bit of a re-emergence of the divine feminine, and a much needed balance being brought up to the forefront. We've seen it with a return of the neo-pagan movement, a lot of the indigenous cultures, as well as other goddess-oriented spiritual practices and beliefs. So, Isabella, to you, what is your definition of the divine feminine and or the goddess?
Yes, great question. Well, I would say the divine feminine for me is both form and formless. She's immanent in all of creation. Spirit and flesh are one in goddess religion. At the same time, she also transcends everything. She's both and. Of so-called physical organization. And so basically, as I mentioned briefly before, she comes under many different names. She's known under many symbols and manifestations. And I also was circling, with a pagan community for several years after moving to California, where we honored all her different facets and symbols. And it was non-denominational, which I loved because it was equally respectful of all the wisdom traditions. So for me, the divine feminine, again, is all of that, and yet it's ultimately, in its essence, it's one. She is one. And so it's I think the form is very important for us to engage perhaps in devotional practice to create connection to her, because we are visual. We want to see an icon. It helps us as an entry point to tune into her energetically, but we also need to be careful to not get too much attached to her form, because as I said, she also transcends form. And when you look, for instance, at the Shakta tradition in India, some of the dark-skinned goddesses, they're like Kali, you have a very interesting symbolism. They are Shakti, and Shakti is really the cosmic life force. It's the creative, vital force that curses through all of us, in all our expressions. And so the Shakti is really transpersonal. So that's why I'm saying we should not get overly identified and attached to some pre-modern conceptions of the divine feminine, the goddess, although they are a very important entry point and an important tool to deepen our connection to the divine feminine if we feel her calling. It's of course not everybody's spiritual path.
I love that you accentuate the concept and the idea of not getting attached to forms. And again, I do agree. I have to agree because for me, the goddess that I connect to really depends on what is it that I am trying to perhaps evoke within myself or within my life or in the world today. Yes, of course, like many pagans, I am dedicated or have a patron goddess. My patron goddess is Isis. She's been a part of my life, my entire life. Actually,
Yeah.
I have a quick story to share with you, which I think you'll get a kick out of, to deal with ISIS.
Yeah.
And I've shared it before, but I think this is a good time to share it. When I was a little boy growing up in South Florida, I had heard something about, if we dig deep enough, we can find water or something like that. So I'm digging in the backyard, and I didn't find any water, and all of a sudden I didn't even care about finding water. I just kept digging, and I had this like innate need that I was looking for something. I must have been 5 or 6 years old. Well, long story short, I had dug myself into a hole so deep that I couldn't get back out of it. Probably like a 5 foot hole in the backyard, and my father's looking for me, and he finds me at the bottom of this hole, and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm looking for ISIS." And he's like, "You're looking for ISIS?" I said, "I'm looking for ISIS." And it was very strange. I looked down. I don't think I ever shared this part of the story. I looked down, and there was this stone, a white, very, very clean looking white stone, which is very weird because we have very dark dirt. It was this white stone, and I picked it up, and I said, "Here, I found it." And I brought it in with me, and I carried it around with me, God, for years after that. But I just thought it was very interesting that before I even knew about ISIS, before I even knew about the goddess or my pagan path, here I am searching for ISIS, and she's always stuck with me ever since.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. I
Yeah,
can just visualize it. Little Bernard digging a hole.
right.
That's awesome.
So we just mentioned ISIS. For those that are just coming to the mother or to the grandmother or the maiden for that matter, what are some of
Yeah.
the more well-known goddesses? I guess in our Western culture, perhaps.
Yes. Well, I would say, definitely, I think Isis has been actually very popular since you mentioned her until, the late Roman period when Christianity became the official state religion after Constantine, and then all her temples and the priestesses were literally shut down because, of course, it was considered pagan and not compatible with the official Christian doctrine. So ISIS has had a considerable influence on Western culture, going back to the Greco-Roman period, which, laid the foundation. And by the way, just quickly, she's also a great role model for us as a goddess woman who was incarnate. And you probably know the story of the mysteries of Isis and Osiris.
Yeah.
And her husband was killed, and his body parts were scattered all over Egypt. And so Isis experienced this deep grief that we humans all go throughout our life. Suffering is always part of it, and we grow in suffering. And as we go through the dark night journey of the soul, we all know we can, attain healing, and we can wake up more fully as a result of that. And so she shows us that it's okay to tune deeply deeply into that grief and to cry out. And she searched for Osiris all over Egypt, wailing and crying. And in Egypt, they still do this ritual at funerals, which is very interesting in our so-called modern times. So she shows that, how to get in touch with also the pain in us rather than bypassing it or, trying to resist it, because we know that's not working. And then she eventually finds Osiris. She retrieves, the body parts, and she revives him again with her wings, because, as you know, she takes on the form of a bird, a soul bird at times. And so he's able to be reborn or resurrects, and then becomes the lord of the death, of the underworld, the realm of the shadows. And she also, assists him in that function, giving hope to the deceased that they will attain immortality. So the whole resurrection theme that we find in Christianity is very ancient and has roots in a lot of these pre-Christian cultures and mythic narratives. And so, but Isis is a very empowered goddess woman. That's why she's an interesting role model, I think, for us today. Not only is she able to feel her pain and work through it, she also revives Osiris. She doesn't give up. She searches for him. She's persistent, and she's highly intelligent. She employs her reason to, find him and trick others into returning him to her.
Right.
So we can all draw inspirations from her qualities.
Wonderful.
I just wanted to elaborate
Thank
on
you.
that.
Isabella, we have a commercial break right now.
Okay.
When we return, we'll continue our discussion with Isabella Price. We'll be right back after this message. And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at revolution.radio. As well, today we are actually streaming live on my YouTube page. We had some issues with Facebook, but hello, my YouTube family. How are you? For some reason, Facebook has a hard time streaming constantly, and I never have a problem with YouTube. We may just have to move here full time. I don't know. But anyway, you are listening to us on Revolution Radio. We are the #1 listener-supported radio network in the world. So if you happen to be at revolution.radio, please go on over and make a contribution to support all of the wonderful shows on the network. And, of course, if you are enjoying the Just Bernard Show, you're on the Just Bernard channel, so I'm sure you've seen more than just this show. Please consider supporting my show, the Just Bernard Show, and you can do that on my Patreon page at patreon.com/Bernard Alvarez. There are a lot of patron-only exclusive videos, classes, audio. So a lot of stuff that you don't see me put on Facebook or you don't see me post here on YouTube or anywhere else, you will find it exclusively on my Patreon page for as little as $2 a month. I'm letting you download a copy of my ebook. Well, my book, The Book of One, is available in electronic format, even just for $2 a month donation. Anyway, with that being said, I want to welcome another author back to my show. Isabella Price is joining us. And Isabella, during the break, I was able to share the book cover on our live stream for those of us who didn't have a chance to look at the cover. It's a beautiful cover, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
What would you say? What is? I know that you have a series called One Truth, Many Paths, and how does this book tie into that?
Yes, thanks for asking. Well, this book is just part of the series. The series honors all wisdom traditions, and the underlying vision is to show that what unites us in our basic humanness is infinitely greater than what divides us. And of course, in the world at large, as you mentioned earlier, we see divide, separation all over the place. So I wanted to specifically also honor the feminine face of the divine, because most studies on comparative religion have pretty much left her out, or if they mention her, it's one little footnote or perhaps 2, 3 little sentences, or at the very best, it's one paragraph. So I wanted to change that, and that prompted me, of course, to write this book. And yeah, I was diving into all the research, on some of the great pioneers of the goddess research, like Maria Gimbutas, Eleanor Gaydon, Carol Christ. I mean, I literally devoured all their books, and that was also a major source of inspiration, in addition to, of course, going to Siama and circling with, my coven and honoring the goddess in her many aspects. So again, and right now, and you mentioned, the great crisis and all, the problems that we face. It's obvious we could go down the list endlessly. Right now, I feel that she is truly rising again. So I felt this deep call that this book has to just be written, and it was a process that took many years, and it put me through the crucible. I mean, that would be a whole other subject, but now the timing is very auspicious, I feel, because we need, as you mentioned earlier, we need to balance and integrate the archetypal masculine with the archetypal feminine. We need to reclaim the sacred in both of them, so that we can become whole human beings again, and that will, of course, have a ripple effect and lead to healing in the world at large, and also putting ourselves into alignment with Mother Earth, this beautiful planet. So that's what I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And with that being said, what are some of the reasons? I mean, a lot of us are those of us who are aware of the divine feminine might be able to see where her energy is needed on the planet at this time. But for let's say the I don't know, the average everyday masculine man, why what should he be looking for in understanding why we need her energy back on this planet? What are the roles that need to be re-examined and or brought back into manifestation during this time in history?
Yes, great question, Bernard. Thank you. Well, first off, I believe that what we need is the fierce aspect of the divine feminine right now. But it's a fierceness that's rooted in truth and love. That is very important to start off. The other thing is that the values that we find in goddess religion, when we go back thousands of years, and perhaps we'll get a chance to dive more deeply into that, are cooperation, partnership, equality, inclusivity, creativity, intuition, playfulness, and sustainability. Using natural resource sustainably. And these are values, of course, that, as we know, have been replaced by what I call a very unhealthy masculine or hyper-masculine paradigms that have emerged, roughly, we can say, especially in the late second millennium BC and in the first millennium, when all forms of organized religions became increasingly patriarchal and managed exclusively by men, as we can see, especially also in the three Abrahamic traditions. And we can see it in our world today when we look at the statistics, and when we look at the crisis and the exploitation and the absurdity that is being played out on the political level, the income inequality, domination, exploitation, authoritarian power structures, conquest, war-driven systems, political and economic system. I mean, it's everywhere. And of course, the exploitation then goes all the way. I mean, sexual abuse, as we've again witnessed with the whole Me Too movement. And of course, it goes hand in hand with the destruction of Mother Earth and the depletion of her resources. So all of that plays into it. And so these values that I mentioned are really the new paradigms that I believe the mother acts as the evolutionary catalyst to propel us to implement this new vision, what we all yearn to see in our hearts, deep in our hearts, this new world. She acts as the evolutionary catalyst because she's Shakti, the vital life force that works in us, as us, and through us, and propels us to take the next evolutionary leap. Because you know as well as I do, and everybody else on that call, if we don't take it, we are doomed. And I believe it's the fierce mother, and especially the dark-skinned mother, Kali Ma from India is a great example, who puts us through this crucible, these birth pangs that we witness now everywhere, because it's an ugly picture right now. It's tough. It's all the shadow issues come to the surface that have never been processed properly on the individual and, of course, also on the collective levels, just starting with this country, but we see it being played out worldwide. And this is where I believe the Dark Mother comes in. She shatters our illusions. She helps us to overcome our fears so that we can make room for the new emergence, the new paradigms that we all long to see in our world.
Wow, and thank you for that. That was a very clear, concise, and thorough answer, and got me about 20 more questions. But
Good. Go for it.
well, I can't help. The first thing that comes to mind is how long the suppression of the divine feminine has been going on, and I can't help but think back to. Well, let's put it this way. About a year or so ago, I did a class called "What if Sex Was Sacred? Sacred Sexuality," and it all had to do with the goddess and how over the last, a couple thousand years, that the female form has been looked upon as dirty, as evil. Whether we want to say it started at during the Garden of Eden, and the apple and the rib and all that nonsense, or was it after the Council of Nicaea that really took control of society? What are your thoughts on the historical aspects of the suppression of the goddess, and how much of this how shall we say crisis do we need to overcome? I mean, this is a psychological crisis as a society that we're living through.
Yes, great question, Bernard. Thank you so much. Yes, I would say roughly the suppression of the feminine face of the divine starts with the emergence of the Abrahamic traditions going back to the first millennium BC. And of course, when you look at the Torah in Judaism, you see many passages where the prophets would always admonish, the Hebrew men to not go into any temples and worship, the Canaanite fertility goddess. God forbid they would do that. So that there is definitely, and of course then when monotheism was strictly enforced, which now according to most recent scholarship didn't really happen until the late 7th century BC, then everything that was goddess worship going back to the Babylonian time, the great goddess Ishtar, Inanna, or Asherah was just oppressed. And then interesting though, during the time of Jesus Christ, Jesus himself, as you know, was all inclusive and was actually really the last friend of the feminine, so to speak, in the Christian tradition. Theologians agree. And also when he prayed to God, he used the Aramaic word Abun Bashmaya, which does not mean God the Father. It's actually God as a parent. So it includes both the father and the mother. And eventually then, as we know, the mother aspect of God got literally lost in translation, or it was, of course, deliberately omitted when Christianity in the 2nd century CE became a religion exclusively managed by men. And that had not been the case. In early Christianity, we had great diversity. Women were allowed to preach the gospel. They would go out and travel. They would take on leadership positions in these communities of early Christianity. So patriarchy in Christianity wasn't strictly enforced until, I would say, starting in the 2nd century CE, and then, of course, especially, in the 3rd and 4th century, when, Christianity became literally an imperial religion, took on the paradigms of the Roman Empire, and pretty much the church, would enforce this one and only doctrine, considered the absolute truth, and everything else was oppressed as heresy, as you know.
You brought up a very good point, and actually an aspect of our history that many people don't seem to understand. And perhaps if you can expand on my comment here, I don't think even I understood the reach of the patriarchal Catholic Church in our Western society and our culture, especially throughout Europe during, well, I don't even know when, the Middle Ages, perhaps even before and a little bit after. Yeah. So when you say an imperial religion, I don't think people understand that the kings had to be in alignment with the Pope. The Pope basically controlled the kings of all the kingdoms.
Yes.
Could you explain that a little bit to the layman that may not understand how far-reaching it really was?
Yes, absolutely. And that's true. It was, the Pope was just like any other of the, so-called Christian kings in the Middle Ages. He would engage in power policies. Popes would, wage wars to defend the territory, the church state around Rome. That was all part, of the Middle Ages and, into the Renaissance and early modern history. But what I also want to say is, to just pick up on the church theme, that the demonization of women's bodies, and especially also their sexuality, started with the so-called tradition of the church fathers, who, when you write how they perceived women, it's truly gory. It's like, as you said, women are more prone to sin because of their childbearing function. Their bodies are close to nature, and as you know, nature was viewed as being corrupted because the original sin had entered the world through a tree and a snake, and of course through the woman, the sinful woman. So all women were looked upon as the daughters of Eve, the sinful first woman. And this misogyny, or contempt for women, peaked in the late 15th century, when a book was published with the blessing of the Pope at that time, called The Witch Hammer, where women were accused of witchcraft because the witch hunters would argue that, well, they are prone to the seduction of the devil because, they engage in sinful sexuality, and their bodies are closer to nature. So, they're inferior to spirit. There was that spirit matter split or spirit body split. And so they would accuse those women of engaging in sexual intercourse with the devil and all sorts of other things, like killing newborn babies or, destroying the crops. And a lot of midwives who were ancient, who were women who carried ancient wisdom like herbal healing and were able to assist women with the pains of childbirth, were demonized and looked upon as witches, and were accused because they were suspicious, because they possessed this ancient healing knowledge. And mostly it was, of course, elderly women. It was partly also for economic reasons. They may had a little home and garden, and of course the church was interested in their property, so it was simply confiscated. So that's all part of it, and this whole problem with sexuality and not honoring the female body and the womb, and of course, the sexuality, in the broader sense, has its roots in some of these notions that have been passed down to us through organized religion. I should say patriarchal organized religions. And even though today, as you know, women obviously are not burned at the stake anymore as witches, but some of these notions are deeply entrenched in our collective unconscious, and on occasion they play themselves out in reactions that we experience. I certainly had my fair share of experience when I say, well, I like to talk about the dark-skinned mother goddesses. I had guys approaching me and saying, well, are you into demonic rituals. You're
Yeah.
talking about demon here. Dark-skinned mothers are suspicious, and most people are very uncomfortable. But I find them very interesting because they're a symbol of our time. So anyway, so that's just to
Yes, no, and
elaborate a bit.
that's very, very true. My goodness, we've only got about 5 minutes left. I can go for another two
Oh
hours.
no.
But speaking of that, there is something to be said for the balance of masculine divinity and feminine divinity. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite holidays in the pagan calendar, the Wheel of the Year, is Beltane, and the sacred rite of the image of the god and the goddess in sexual union is a part of that. Whereas the earth mother connects with the sky father in order to fertilize the earth and to bring the crops and bring life forth, etc., etc. I wonder how this ancient concept of the sacred marriage plays into our modern culture.
Yes, that's a great question. Well, as you say, it has ancient roots going back to Mesopotamia when the king was ritually wedded to the goddess who actually endorsed him in his power for another year, but it was also to, of course, ensure an abundant harvest. Now, how does that ritual still make sense to our modern times, and how can we apply it, and what are the inspirations? I would just talk about the sacred marriage within us, and that's the union and integration of both the healthy archetypal masculine with the healthy feminine. And we have to understand that the masculine and feminine, we have to dissociate those terms from gender. I think this is a very important thing to prevent misconceptions. So that means like all of us, regardless of gender, have all these archetypes, these qualities and energies available within us, the whole range, psychologically and energetically speaking. So what we need is a sacred marriage, a union of both the masculine and the feminine, reclaiming the sacred in both of them. And that will not only heal ourselves and make us whole human beings, healed human beings, but it will put us into alignment with our beautiful planet and all the other life forms with whom we share, and also the world at large. And that means, of course, implementing those values rooted in God's wisdom cultures that I mentioned before. And I feel also, to perhaps conclude, that it's very important that especially we women step it up at this critical evolutionary threshold. That's why I was so exhilarating for me to march, at the Women March recently and feel the vibe, the healthy revolutionary spirit. And it was very empowering, psycho-spiritual, because I feel that we women together in partnership with conscious men like you and others who are supporting us, we have to step it up as feminine co-creators. I'm now adopting a term that Barbara Marx Hubbard coined, the evolutionary visionary, and this is like a co-creative dance in partnership with the divine, with spirit, that we have to also give our highest contribution. We have to help to make it happen, because it's not just going to happen all by itself. There's not this old sugar daddy up in the sky, the sky father looking down and doing some miraculous interventions to just create this new world that we all yearn to see. We have to do our part as well. So this is a co-creative dance. And here is where Barbara Marx Hubbard also comes in with her notion of the feminine co-creator, but I believe it has to happen in cooperation and partnership with the sacred masculine, with conscious man.
Beautifully stated. Thank you. I'm lucky. I'm happy to say we got about 2 more minutes. So I have one last question to ask you. And I do feel it's a very important question, because I have seen where, especially when we're all excited about a new concept or new philosophy, we really cling to it, and we really, what's the word? Proselytize it, for lack of a better term, to the point of annoyance, quite honestly. And I feel that can be a pitfall. What are some of the pitfalls that we can look at, that we should be aware of when we're dealing with the concept of the divine feminine?
Great question, and there are clearly pitfalls. Well, one is, as I just mentioned, if we we are not able to dissociate the feminine and the masculine from gender. And a lot of men, I know they still have that notion in their head that the goddess is only for women, and nothing could be further from the truth, because her energy expresses herself, I say, in all creative endeavors, in the innovation. If you write a book, whatever you do, she's the creative impulse, Shakti, driving evolution. So it's in man, it's in all of us. Our intuition also, I think, is very important. Comes, it's more in the also in the right, part of our brain. And to really tune into the mother's energy, it's important that we also find a balance between left and right brain. But again, she's in all of us. So pitfall would be to say, well, it's only for women, the goddess. That's one thing. The other thing is, if we get too much stuck in some pre-modern notions of her that were okay, thousands of years ago, when we had, horticultural societies, and after the transition into farming and domestication of animals, some of these bird goddesses, snake goddesses. I mean, that's all wonderful, but we shouldn't be stuck there, because otherwise it's just like another concept, and we don't need more concept. So it's important to really have this wide, broad view, and to just see that the mother is both. She's nurturing, benevolent, but she's also the fierce mother. She's form, but she also goes beyond form. I mean, that really is a pitfall, being stuck in these pre-modern notions, forms of the divine feminine.
That's a great answer. And actually, one of my pet peeves, I used to joke with my friends of in South Florida, in the pagan culture, the pagan community. I was like, we have to realize that we're living in the 20th century. Back then it was the 20th century. I was like, we're not living. We all used to go to the Renaissance Fair. I love the Renaissance Fair. But we weren't trying to recreate the Middle Ages. I wouldn't want to recreate the Middle Ages. We want the modern concept of the goddess. We want the modern 21st century aspects, and align with what she can do today. I think would be a great way to look at it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Wonderful. Well, we got 1 minute, so ever so quickly, can you tell us a little bit about your book, and where can people get the book?
Oh, well, there's different platforms. The best is probably Amazon, but it's nice if you can support indie bookstores. Also, the IndieBound is one of the platforms. And then, of course, Barnes and Noble. And Mango, which is my publisher.
Oh,
So and I have, of course, and I have author page, and I'm on social media, especially Facebook, where I'm most active. Also LinkedIn and a little bit on Twitter. And there's also a video there that you can watch that gives you some insights into my book on my Amazon author page. So you can just visit those.
wonderful.
And I invite you to explore more in depth, and to at least check out my book and my website, of course, that you already mentioned.
Yes, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Isabella. It has been such a pleasure having you on today's show. For those of you listening and watching, next week is my
Thank
personal one-on-one Q&A. If you have any questions for me, we're going to do a casual hangout and chat. I know a lot of you write me. I'm going to answer some of the questions you written me with, and I'll also be answering your questions live. Until then, have a wonderful week. You're listening and watching the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio, and today on youtube.com/justbernard. I love you, everybody. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.